There we go. I was waiting for the library gates to close, but they're not nearly as noisy as they used to be. They're very quiet. Thank you very much. And that means it's 7 o'clock, and it's time to call to order our regular meeting of council for Wednesday, January 17th, 2018, the first one of the 2018 calendar year. So welcome back to everyone who was away and had a chance for a break, whether it was in Sechelt or whether it was a further afield like Todd in India. Great trip, obviously. And first order is always the adoption of the agenda. And we have a little bit of additional information regarding a temporary use permit that comes up as a business item later. That's information that was coming in by email and is now on paper. But we also have a slightly amended version of the minutes of the Public Works, Parks and Environment Committee meeting for Wednesday, December 20th. And what's amended in that is simply the numbering of the recommendations. So the text and the content is all the same, but the recommendations are numbered more appropriately as in the right order. So with those amendments, motion to adopt the agenda as amended and circulated. Thank you, Councillor Wright and Councillor Seegers. Any additions or deletions? Nothing from staff, nothing from council. All those in favor? Adopted agenda. Thank you. And before I go any further with the appointments, delegations, or proclamations that we have, I'd like to start this evening by welcoming the most recent member of our senior management team, Tracy Corbett. Comes to us from Kelowna, Victoria, and more recently Airdrie, Alberta, a high-growth community, but communities that are all larger than Sechelt. We're very glad to have you here. Welcome. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say thank you to the Acting Director of Planning and Development for these many months, if almost a year. It was almost a year ago today that Director Doug Stewart stepped into the role of Director of Everything and Acting CAO as well. And if we had a Time magazine for Sechelt, he would be Man of the Year. Along with Mr. Trump, maybe you could. Well, no, apparently he makes his own time covers is what I was thinking. So we could make one for you, but we really appreciate the work you did, certainly as Acting CAO, which was finally had that drop away, but this is the last, and now we can expect the productivity of the finance department to go up by 3 or 4 times, I guess. Either that or we'll only see you a couple of days a week, and because you've obviously been doing a lot. So, but we really appreciate it. You have really helped a lot in the last year. Moving on, proclamation, Heart Month. Whereas heart disease or stroke takes a Canadian life every 7 minutes, and whereas Heart and Stroke's mission is to prevent disease, save lives, and promote recovery, as a volunteer-based health charity, we strive to tangibly improve the health of every Canadian family every day. And whereas February is Heart Month in Canada, during which Heart and Stroke Canvassing Campaign takes place to support ongoing heart disease and stroke life-saving research, health promotion, and advocacy. And whereas we applaud and commend the thousands of volunteers, staff, and researchers of Heart and Stroke for their dedication and commitment and wish them continued success, now therefore I, Bruce Milne, Mayor and heart patient, do hereby proclaim that February 2018 shall be known as Heart Month in the District of Sechelt. And item 5, minutes of the 9 a.m. Special Council meeting of December 20th, 2017, and this was the meeting where we addressed the issue of rezoning for the shelter for emergency shelter on Wharf Street. First, a motion to receive. Thank you, Councillor Seegers, Councillor Shanks. Any errors or omissions? A motion to adopt from the same two, and all those in favor? Thank you, that's carried. And secondly, minutes 5.2, minutes of the 7 p.m. regular meeting of December 20th, pages 12 to 23 of your agenda. A motion to receive and adopt. Thank you, Councillor Seegers, Councillor Shanks, seconding. Any errors or omissions in those minutes? Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Worship. On page 15, Resolution 2017-12E9, I believe I was opposed to that motion. And the following motion, 12E10, I was also opposed to, and I would like that recorded. Thank you.
Okay, let's make sure we get them right here. RTC Properties, items 9 and 10. Okay. And I was looking at those today and hoping we'd got all the oppositions noted and votes carried. Any other errors or omissions in those minutes? There was one that I noticed on page 20, I suspect was an error, but I'm not positive. Item 8.4 in the, we brought back item 8.4 on the biosolids because I had mistakenly not noticed that Councillor Seegers wanted to speak to it. She did speak to that, and I think that she also spoke to the fact that the biosolids may create extra work for staff, but it would be unlikely that the councillor would speak to something out of topic. So I suspect that the final sentence of that 8.4 should say as well, concerns were raised regarding the potential extra work caused for staff with the implementation of these fees, period. And it wasn't about parking at the wharf. That came up in a previous discussion. So I think we should correct that. And the only other one I had was that we slipped into a little bit of colloquialism in the very final page, page 23, and I hadn't noticed it before, and maybe we've done it before. Moved and seconded on 12.3 and 12.4 that stats from the Sunshine Coast RCMP and stats from the Sechelt Visitor Center. I'm sure we usually use information, or I've never seen us use stats before. So saving time in the keystrokes. These are formal minutes. Anything else? All those in favor of adoption of those minutes? Thank you. And any business arising from either of those? No business arising? Then we'll go directly to the minutes, item 7.1, minutes of the Planning and Community Development Committee, pages 24 to 30. Motion to receive and adopt. Thank you, Councillor Mueller and Councillor Lutz. Any of those recommendations need to be pulled out for further discussion? In that case, I would look for a motion to adopt the recommendations 4 through to whatever the end is. 4 through 8, 9. Councillor Mueller, thank you. Councillor Lutz. Any discussion? All of those in favor? Any opposed? And those minutes and recommendations are now endorsed by council. And we look then to the minutes of the Public Works, Parks and Environment. And this is the one that we have an amended version of with a different ordering of the recommendations. Motion to receive and adopt. Councillor Inkster as chair and Councillor Lutz. Any of those recommendations need to be pulled out for further? Councillor Seegers.
Thank you. Recommendation number 9.
District of Sechelt Operations Center Mechanical and Electrical Report.
Yes, the second one around the solar panels, please. So
yes.
The one that is now number 9 here. The second number 9 and the first one.
Okay. And anything else that people would like to pull out for discussion? If not, I'll look for a recommendation to adopt. We don't need the agenda or minutes. Recommendations 3 through to 8 and recommendation 10. Thank you, Councillor Inkster and Councillor Lutz. All those in favor? That's carried. And we'll move to recommendation 9. Moved and seconded that solar panels not be installed on the operations center at this time, but the conduit be installed now so that solar can be installed in the future if desired. Can I have somebody move that for discussion? Councillor Inkster and Councillor Lutz and Councillor Seegers.
Thank you. As most of you have probably seen in the paper, Prism Engineering has been working with the School District 46 on solar panels, and they have, inside of their study, found that it actually is beneficial to move it forward. So given that they did ours, what I would like to see is when this information comes back to us, that report be revisited that was provided, that instead of using sample data, we use real world examples at actual rates versus usage, and reference our policy on renewables and our new ICSP report. Given that, our example of leadership is that in our documents, we are actually going to use renewable resources. I'd like to see that we revisit this prior to actually committing to moving forward and not putting solar panels on that building.
So the question is how we should deal with this recommendation. We could send the entire recommendation back to the Public Works Committee. We could defeat it, or we could simply wait until we get to the building stage and talk about it there. So
I think there's more work that needs to be done before we say we're not going to go ahead, given what we're seeing in the community.
Okay, so that would be a recommendation to defeat the motion as it stands, and
Or
then
defer
it would
back to staff.
And if it was defeated, it would just simply go back.
Okay, thank you.
People would have to deal with it. Councillor Inkster.
Yeah, thank you. I'm prepared to support and or be comfortable with it going back for further discussion. The payback time, as many of the members know that were at the meeting, is a little lengthy and not necessarily a good use of taxpayers' money. So as chair, I was comfortable in previous discussions with Mr. Kootenay on delaying that, but having the wiring in place. I'm not sure what Councillor Seegers is referring to in the school district, if she means Davis Bay Elementary. If that's what she's referring to, interestingly enough, that was a project we funded. The district funded, so it's ironic. Yeah.
Well, I think the request was to make sure it was based on real data and other examples. Well, and we have our own water resource center, of course, with solar panels on it. So that should give us some real world data, and the prices of solar panels should be put in place. So if it requires some additional thought before we get there, and we're a long ways from having to decide about the conduits, there's time, I think, to defeat this motion, and then staff will bring it back. So any further discussion? And I know, I think we'll just simply defeat it, and then it'll go back to staff, because they won't know what to do. So they'll have to come back and say, well, what should we do here? So it'll come back to the public. And I know that the chair of the Public Works has always been strongly in favor of renewables and sustainables, so it should be given a good second look at the same committee. So all those in favor of endorsing it as it stands, and all those in favor of, all those against the motion? That's carried. Okay. I'd forgotten, it's so long since we defeated anything. So what I expect to happen there is staff will say, oh, what happened last night? Oh, it should go back for further review, and then it'll turn up at the committee with, as suggested, some a different data set that people are more comfortable with. I think that moves us over to the business items, item 10 and 10.1, starting with a report from bylaw enforcement on the CAT bylaw. So first, a motion to receive. Thank you. Thank you. All those in favor? That carried. And when staff is comfortable, we'll give you a chance to speak to it. And I want to thank you for a very lengthy report. Lots of information. Mr. Horning.
I'll just work on this. I gotta turn it on. Okay. So the questions in relation to a cat bylaw within the District of Sechelt. Do we require them? Should the District of Sechelt require cats to be identified? Should the district require sterilization and limit cat reproduction? And should the district restrict the limit of cat behavior? So the report outlines all those basic issues that have been brought forward by numerous different groups and individuals within the community. So some of the history and the background in relation to cat bylaws and cat information being brought forward to council. The first one was in 1998. The second one brought before council was in 2000. And then communications related to cats and cat behavior were brought forth to council in correspondence in 2011, 2012, 2014, 2016, 2015, and 2017. So cats and cat bylaws attempt to do the following: identify the owners, the number of cats per household, the care of the cats, the sale of the cats, spaying and neutering, and trespassing on public and private property. So information was received again from the district, from the SPC January 12th late. So some of this is new information related to it. So in 26%, or in 2016, 48% of cats were returned to owners, which was an anomaly in relation to the rest of the province. In 2017, information was received on January 12th that 26% were returned to the owners. And since 2014, we had 4 calls for service related to cats. So from a bylaw perspective in relation to it, and the enforcement challenges are that more time for bylaw enforcement would be required in relation to this, if there is a true desire and want for the District of Sechelt to enforce this. At this given point in time, last year, our calls for service for the District of Sechelt increased 50%. We attend over 1,000 calls related to bylaw-related offenses in the District of Sechelt, which for most municipalities this size is astronomical. There would be a greater expectation to enforce the bylaws when they're there. They're complicated and different, keeping cats on one's property, so if we limited people to having them on their property, cats are different in nature than dogs. They jump, if you're going to have them, you're going to be on a string or some other mechanism to control them. The bylaws are all over the place when it comes down to identification. Some of the bylaws require the owners to do their own identification. Some of them require chips, some are permanent, some of them require registration with the municipalities. But most of them don't enforce or do anything in relation to it. And cats, by their pure nature, are difficult to capture. So one of the things a bylaw should do is allow for easy enforcement and process. And the cost to municipalities in relation to a cat bylaw were high. And in some municipalities, they eliminated and discontinued a cat bylaw and had it repealed. From public relations, the perception from the public is cat ownership is different from dogs, good or bad. People aren't as concerned with dogs or cats as much as dogs. If you're missing a dog, an owner will go look for a dog. If your cat is missing for a couple of days, it'll probably show up. Concerns from owners wearing collars and tags of possible injury and that from dogs or from cats. Capturing them again is more difficult. Keeping cats roaming is more challenging. And cats are more replaceable than a dog. A cat being missing will be replaced more than a dog would be replaced. So questions, are the costs associated with cat bylaw part of the business that the District of Sechelt is willing to budget for? Should the District of Sechelt be involved in the education and incentive programs for cat owners? Should the District of Sechelt be involved in the education or encouragement of residents to make changes to the property and deter cats from if they are unwanted? And what would be the objective of cat bylaw, and can this be obtained? So this was obtained on January 12th from SPCA in relation to correspondence to us. And it spoke about Dawson Creek and their successes in relation to a bylaw that they adopted. So the return to owner rate for 2015 was from 10% to 40%, which was still less than the return rate in 2016. So what the results for would be within the District of Sechelt would be unknown. The other thing with Dawson Creek, there was no requirements related to spay or neutering in their bylaw, and there was no requirements in relation to the retention or keeping the pets on your property. So this would address very limited portions of cat behavior. From the same document on January 12th from the SPCA, this was from Port Alberni. Port Alberni has no retention on the property as well. And it says no running at large for intact, spayed and neutered, small roaming areas. I have the bylaw in front of me. I don't see that in there. They have mandatory identification, but not through the city of Port Alberni. So it would be mandatory for owners, but not something that would be managed by the District of Sechelt or by the city of Port Alberni. So there's portions of this that I don't see. And again, their return rates to 25% are still even less than 2017 within the District of Sechelt currently. This appears to be a program that works incredibly well with the SPCA and the communities and that within the District of Sechelt. And it could be something that the District of Sechelt could support and enforce or look at going further with in providing these supports for cat owners. Other animal control bylaws that have gone into place, Morinville, Alberta, they basically removed any enforcement in relation to cats in 2015. Kamloops has voluntary cat registration with the city of Kamloops. They had 4 cats at one point. They currently have 1 cat registered with them. Maple Ridge has no enforcement any longer. The Fraser Regional District takes no enforcement calls or service related to cats, and most of the Fraser Valley communities have repealed their bylaws. And North Vancouver has also repealed its cat bylaws and indicated in publicly that the bylaw itself was next to impossible to enforce. So the adoption of cat bylaw in communities, I spoke to, have resulted in no long-term results in reducing or eliminating the issues that have brought forth the adoption of the bylaw. It appears that these communities, the bylaws associated with cats, did not realize their objective intent. It is recommended that council not support or consider amendments to the dog licensing and control bylaw or a separate cat control and licensing bylaw.
Thank you very much. I'll look to council to see if there's any clarifications or comments while you're still here, and then we'll look for some council discussion. I think it's pretty clear that the bylaw officers don't want to be enforcing it from the report. Councillor Seegers.
Thank you. In the package we have on page 40, middle bullet at the bottom says, if we were to put something in place, a greater portion of animal control services costs borne by animal guardians as opposed to the general taxpayers. But if you go to the previous page, it indicates there's no fee associated with any of the bylaws that were indicated. So where would the actual revenue come from?
It would come into whether or not the District of Sechelt actually licensed and actually took in a fee associated to it. And then the fees are offset, again, in relation to what the real cost in relation to managing the cost to the SPCA and the cost borne to the District of Sechelt in relation to the carrying and housing of the animals. We pay in relation to their services to us.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments while Greg's here? Councillor Mueller.
Thanks. Yeah, with this particular one, it seems like, well, if we can't get the behavior we're looking for from a bylaw, then maybe bylaw's not the right place. However, I have thought many times that we could be involved in the education around responsible pet ownership. We know that we have a variety of issues related to pets in our community and pet owners. So cats, this is something that's been brought to our attention. We know we have other issues with dogs, perhaps both not needing a bylaw, but rather some education. So I would be interested in hearing more about that. I think it's clear that this bylaw is not going to do what it's intended to do. So I wouldn't be supporting it.
Any other comments or questions at this moment? Councillor Lutz.
Thank you. I'm a cat owner. Well, the cat owns me, like in most cases. And I also have a neighbor's cat that owns me, comes and sleeps on my bed and eats the cat's food whenever it wants. I know how impossible it is to manage cats, but it's not totally impossible. And I agree with Councillor Mueller. I think if we look at education, that we might have more luck than with bylaws and enforcement of bylaws. So if there's some way we can support the SPCA, maybe through grants and aid or something, that would help to do some educationals, I think that might be a better way to go.
Councillor Seegers.
Thank you. I agree with that piece, and I would suggest that we reach out to the other municipalities as well, because it's probably not just our issue. And the SPCA is an organization that is coast-wide. So we could potentially request that staff approach them to see if there's something that we can do and the other organizations, other municipalities can do to assist them in providing education around cat and dog ownership.
Okay. If I can speak to this for a moment. Good report, but it was pretty self-evident from reading the report that there was not, I wouldn't even call it a neutrality on the part of bylaw officers. They certainly didn't want to have that downloaded onto them just because of the day-to-day work, and they can understand what it would be like in the community. If you looked at the history of the times this has been addressed in the District of Sechelt, you'll be clear that I'm at least open to the idea of a cat bylaw, 1998, 2000, and then we have had a stream of communications from the community at large. So it's clearly an irritant among the community that we live in and among neighbors. And I agree totally that it's educational, but throughout this, I'm concerned that you suggest, in fact, right on the page it was just before, in terms of helping people cat-proof their property as opposed to putting the responsibility on the owners. And I'm quite sure if Councillor Lutz didn't want the neighboring cat to be coming into her house, she could stop that. They are not hard to control, and owners are the ones that we need to somehow deal with. And so I think there's three issues here. One of them is the genuine, well-documented, researched, supported impact of domesticated animals on the natural population, the natural bird population. You cannot ignore that or pretend it's just an accident. There are millions and millions of songbirds that are destroyed on a regular basis by domesticated animals because owners don't want to look after them in a way that helps that wildlife and domesticated life interact. The second issue is the irritant to individuals in terms of what dogs, cats, and other domesticated animals do to neighbors' property, and you may or may not take that seriously, but I've had more complaints directly to me than the District of Sechelt has, and people who garden, and I mean not just water some shrubs, but people who garden and seed and put their hands in the soil on a regular basis know that as soon as they've laid some freshly laid soil, if they don't cover it with all sorts of restrictive material, the cats will be in overnight to change and destroy that. So, and I get those complaints in Davis Bay from just walking around the neighborhood. So I know that that part's real. And then there's the spaying, neutering. I don't think we have a problem with feral cats on the coast that I'm aware of, but certainly not in the urbanized areas. But that's something that can get out of hand quite quickly. And so something we need to keep in mind. Most of the bylaws seem to be concerned with feral cats and the spay-neutering program. Some of them are a little concerned about the roaming off. I think that's primarily education, but it's very difficult for neighbors to know what to do when the neighboring cat is coming into the living room and eating the food or going through the garden or doing whatever they apparently want to do. And I think those members of our community need somewhere, at least a pamphlet or some education or something where they can actually have somebody from the district go to those neighbors and say, look, your cat's killing X number. The number of birds, if I collected the feathers, we live right beside a very wooded area that I'm trying to keep wooded, and the damage from the bird habitat is always on the grassy areas. And if I collected that over a year or two, I think you'd be shocked at what I could bring and put in here. So something should be done about that. Just about, if we're going to live with domesticated animals, we have to figure out the interface on that. So I feel fairly strongly that we should do something. And I don't think we'll stop the stream of letters that come in and have been coming in until we actually address it and say, yeah, it's real. So whether we do that through education, which I think is the primary way, and I understand we're not going to have bylaw officers running around Sechelt with traps and be lucky if you can get photographs. Though even that would be useful, because then people would say, look, I've got a picture. Somebody else can tell me where the cat's coming from. And that might help a bit. I don't know how we address this, but I do thank you for bringing it forward and for council to have at least a considered review of it. I think that sounds like we're not ready for a cat bylaw tonight, but I've heard 3 people say they're opposed to it, so I suspect there's others.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'm certainly not opposed to it. It's what the problem is the management of it. And that's the problem with the bylaws when it comes down to cats. There has been just so little success when it comes down to actually a cat bylaw being put in place and actually seeing some real tangible results in relation to it. So I agree that I think that the best way to manage and protect, and I'm completely in favor of managing and protecting, our wildlife and songbirds and everything else. But a bylaw doesn't seem to accomplish those goals. And I agree that it should be the education portion of it, and with SPCA, and if bylaw can assist in relation to that, we're certainly not opposed to it in any way. It's just that a bylaw doesn't seem to be the right mechanism to get the results that you want or intend to get.
We have lots of bylaws, I suspect, that are not easy to enforce. And I know that most of your work for UNN is both educational. It's about negotiating and talking to people, getting them to be good neighbors, and it's not about enforcement. And that's the way we would like things to be. But it is about complaint as well. And one of the reasons we don't get complaints is because there's nothing legal for them to phone in about. I think if we had a bylaw, we'd probably hear more complaints on that. So the will of council, I heard 3 people say they weren't prepared for this. I wonder if anyone else wants to speak. And then we should look at the recommendation, which is that council not consider amendments or a separate bylaw at this time. Councillor Inkster? And then we may look for something about education, working with the SPCA. Though the SPCA, just as an aside, are actually in support of bylaws. Right. They want bylaws. So if we go to ask them how to work with them, they might just say, put that bylaw in place. Councillor Inkster.
Yeah, I mean, having animals, many number of cats over the years that don't have one now, but a dog, and now is, how do you control them with the songbirds that you're referring to? It reminds me of this bylaw as proposed, the pesticide bylaw. Difficult one to enforce, but it's all about informing the public about an action or inaction that most of society would deem as not necessarily appropriate. So how do we educate the public on this particular one? The enforcement part is the challenging one to me, as I'd indicated with the pesticide bylaws. So that would be, I think of cat bylaws and our bylaw staff, and I start to think of Monty Python skits, of how they would control these bylaws, chasing them around town. But one of the ways, I don't know, the cat identification thing, how that moves through and things like that is maybe, you throw ideas out there because that's where we're at, is just throwing ideas out there as maybe a licensing program that includes a license attached to a bell or some, just ideas that you throw out there so that those that they're predating on in terms of a sport or whatever, because we feed them, so I'm sure it's a sport, is at least to give a fighting chance to the birds that they're interested in chasing as sport. So a bell may help, but how do you do that, and how do you identify that? You may have to have a licensing identification bylaw that then comes with the bells, so that they make noise when they're around the birds, because as you have indicated, and many members of our community know, there is a lot of signs of feathers around and that they've caught a lot. Although they are good with, sometimes good with vermin though, so there's that. Yeah.
Yeah, the cats go after many small things, some which we like, some we don't like. So that's certainly real. And if all owners belled their cats, we probably wouldn't be even talking about this. We'd be talking about spay and neutering. Councillor Mueller.
Well, I mean, we've heard a little bit of discussion on this. Obviously, we know that cats also perform an important function in terms of controlling vermin. That in some places in the coast, that's the only way that you can control them is with a cat. So we have to keep that in mind. But if the issue is the largest part of this issue is about the killing of birds, then perhaps we need something that addresses that in particular. There was other part in this report that discussed about the impact of large frame windows, the see-through postless glass rails. Those, an enormous amount of birds get killed by those. And if we wanted to do something to improve that, there are a number of ways that we could prevent the killing of birds in Sechelt that has almost nothing to do with cats. The cat bell is obviously an interesting one, but that prevents and precludes, I think, most of the cats from dealing with the vermin that we want them to get rid of. So multifaceted, I would be in favor of something that would protect birds, but as long as it worked.
Okay, so we have actually don't have the recommendation on the floor, but we should, so we can deal with this and move along. Councillor Shanks, to move the council not consider amendments to the dog licensing and control bylaw number 221, 1994, or a separate cat control and licensing bylaw, seconded by Councillor Wright. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? And that is carried. Thank you for the work. And thank you, Council, for the discussion. And if we can come up with some ideas on education, I'd look forward to that from councillors or staff. Moving on to the next item, which is 10.2, report from Arts, Culture and Communications Coordinator. And first, a motion to receive the report. Councillor Mueller, Councillor Lutz, all those in favor? Any opposed? You're going to speak from there so you can guide your own camera angles?
No. Camera doesn't reach over here.
Okay.
Conveniently.
Hidden behind the cameras is our cultural coordinator, Siobhan Smith, who will now speak to the report.
So this is a report outlining request for support for our municipal arts festival, the Sechelt Arts Festival. Our festival, one of our festival producers is in the audience this evening, in case you do have any questions. They would like to apply for a couple of grants, but the festival itself is not eligible to apply directly for those grants. And so they are able to apply with the support of the District of Sechelt. So the first one is a BC Arts Council grant that the Sunshine Coast Arts Council will actually apply for on behalf of the Sechelt Arts Festival. And the other one is a federal grant, that we would need to fill out some paperwork, very straightforward paperwork, just outlining what our municipal support of the festival is.
So that's actually a change from the heritage from previous years?
No. It's a change in the way it's worded. The grant is the exact same. The grant is only available to nonprofit groups, whether they're incorporated or unincorporated. Municipalities are not eligible for that federal funding.
But municipalities have to indicate their support
That
for
they
the
are
project.
supporting, yes. So, you know, it helps them when they're making their decisions about who to give funding to know that the municipality is in support of the applicant.
Okay. That's the part that I didn't think was always there. So thank you for that. Any questions on these two while the cultural coordinator is with us? Councillor Seegers?
I'll move recommendation 2.2 and 2.3.
That's seconded by Councillor Inkster. Again, any discussion or clarification on this? If not, all those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. Thank you very much, and thank you for the work of the Sechelt Arts Festival. And now, item 10.3, report from the manager of parks on the community dedication program and resuming that program. So first, motion to receive, Councillor Mueller, Councillor Inkster. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. None opposed, and fairly straightforward report. Is there anyone to speak to it? Nope. Okay. It's resumption of phase 2. Let's see if somebody would like to move the recommendation. 2.2, Councillor Seegers, thank you, and Councillor Wright, seconding. That council approve the resumption of phase 2 of the district's dedication program and updated policy. And the policy is included and attached. I noticed that item 5 in the policy said inscription wording will be provided by the district on bronze plaques. Do we in fact always use bronze still or now? I noticed on the wharf, for example, we didn't use, or the community association didn't use bronze for cost purposes. I remember being part of that discussion. So I just wanted to make sure we weren't caught in the past by saying we're doing something that in fact has been superseded by newer materials. Other than that, that was just a point to look at some point. Or somebody may come back and say, well, you said it would be bronze. And I don't like this new. Any discussion of the recommendation? All those in favor? That's carried unanimously. Moving on to the temporary use permit. 10.4, report from the community planner. Motion to receive the report, Councillor Seegers, Councillor Wright seconding. All those in favor? Any opposed? And we'll look to the community planner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this report is coming forward as a continuation in the process of applying for the temporary use permit, which came to council on December 6th, following the resolution to authorize the temporary use permit further as indicated in the report. And the report was really just to notify of that the public notification process as required by the Local Government Act had been completed. The comments were received up until 4:30 today. We received 4 comments, which you have in printed form in front of you. And yeah, one of which I hadn't seen that was CC'd to me, but that's all I really have to say, unless you have questions.
I'm sure there may be some because of the correspondence that came through, and where the temporary use applies, or whether it applies over the entire property and foreshore lease. That seemed to be the main question that came through. So could you address that?
Yes, so the entire property is zoned I-1, the upland portion, and the foreshore lot 6102 is also zoned I-1. So if the kayak business were to operate in the water and on the upland portion, it would be operating not conforming to the zoning. So therefore, the temporary use permit was issued to those two portions, considering that they'd be using those two parts of the lot.
There seemed to be some concern that the temporary use permit extending onto the foreshore and the water lot would then give the proponent a form of control over the water.
Yeah, the temporary use permit does not prohibit the public from using the land. It's just a zoning that the District of Sechelt has over the water.
So it's
surface.
it's permissive for the kayak company,
Yes.
but not prohibitive for anyone else.
That's right. And there is, I did call the province to try and find out, just as background information on the expired, so there was a lease on that foreshore lot, and it expired in November 2016, I was told. And it appears there's also pending application for renewal, which I don't know any other information about, for the log handling and storage, I think it was. But the District of Sechelt has not received a referral from the province on that, which we would in the...
So if the lease wasn't renewed, does that mean the foreshore lot 6102 no longer exists? Or does it only exist under lease and therefore it doesn't exist? Or are we zoning something that doesn't exist? Or does it exist in perpetuity and various people can apply for the lease and own the lease? How does that work?
I do know that our zoning maps show it as a zoned lot. So our zoning is still there as I-1, even though the provincial lease...
Regardless of the title or lease or any ownership. Interesting. Okay, those were my questions. Any other questions from council? Councillor Inkster?
Yeah, just in reading this information, it just appears that it's just giving somebody somewhat regular access, most likely seasonally, I'm assuming, to the shoreline, and with no restrictions on anybody else to be there. And of course, the equipment would be protected in the evenings, et cetera, so that there wouldn't be further restrictions on people to be there, because the equipment would be monitored and looked after by the proponents. So I guess we just need to educate those that are concerned that we're with this permit restricting access to the shoreline, which as far as I can tell and has been explained, we are not doing.
Any other comments? And I don't think it's a Trojan horse that's sort of accidentally bringing in commercialization or commercial work. It's a temporary use permit for what exists. And Councillor Seegers.
Thank you. Mayor Milne, you addressed the concerns I had. Because the question I had was that, does the foreshore lease preclude others from using the area? And I'm satisfied that we've addressed the concerns that the proponent or the residents in the area have submitted to us. Thank you for following up on that.
And Councillor Mueller.
I think what I read into this was was the issue of use, but perhaps as I read through this report again, there was that instance in some minds that there could be some type of structure built in that water lease. Is there any comment from staff on if that's possible, or should we provide additional wording that prevent that?
So the temporary use permit, which would authorize the kayak tour company to continue or to operate in that area, does not include any type of structure in the foreshore lot. Like, it's limited to the things that we've put into the draft permit.
Okay,
And
So
are
it
those,
would
are
be-
those identified in terms of where they're sited? So it allows for temporary structures, including storage compound, outhouse, office building, RV. Can they locate, is the location of those cited? Or could they in fact say, oh, we're going to put our temporary structure out on the foreshore?
Yeah, even if they did do that, they would have to come to us for permits to construct it.
And it would sink.
Yeah, it was intended for the land.
We all know what it was intended for.
Yeah.
We're worried about loopholes. That's all. And we don't expect any, but the residents of the area have been very supportive of this particular project. They're also one of the more vigilant residents groups in the entire community, and they watch for details. So we want to make sure we've ticked off those before we embarrass ourselves. Councillor Mueller, do you have any follow-up on that?
No, I think that covered it. I just wanted to make sure that we understand that that may become an issue, but I don't see that it would be now. So.
Okay, do we have somebody to move the recommendation? Councillor Inkster, Councillor Seegers seconding that council authorize the issuance of a temporary use permit number 2017-02 for foreshore lot 6102, and I won't read out the list. All those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. Started last August. Okay. And there was strong support in the community, and that was as important as anything. Moving to 10.5, we have a report on the Chapman Creek Holdings. First, a motion that the report from the community planner dated January 9th, 2018 regarding the development agreement for official community plan amendment bylaw number 49219-2017 be received. Thank you, Councillor Wright and Councillor Seegers for seconding that. And we'll turn it then to Mr. Thompson, our community planner.
Thank you, Your Worship. So the purpose of this report is to get authorization for the District of Sechelt to enter into a development agreement with Chapman Creek Holdings and JMP Holdings Limited, so that we could secure the conditions of adoption that have been previously endorsed by Council as part of the rezoning and official community plan amendment for these properties to allow for the expansion of the Big Maples Mobile Home Park. The reasoning behind this this method of securing the conditions of adoption is, as Council knows, the DCC bylaw was adopted February 1st, 2017, and under the provincial legislation, in-stream applications such as this would be considered in their old DCC bylaws until 1 year after the date of the adoption of the new bylaw. So as we come up to that date on February 1st, 2018, many projects are facing will be facing an increase to DCCs that may affect the feasibility of the projects. So by working with the applicant over the last few months, we've been able to make a lot of progress on a lot of these conditions of adoption. However, some of the conditions of adoption are still unfulfilled and require some additional steps before they could be before they could be completed. So by working with the applicant, staff have proposed that we can secure these remaining conditions through a development agreement and have that tied to the occupancy of any of the units installed on the land. This would allow the district to be able to issue the issue the building permits and, of course, the development permit, and allow for the applicant to pay for the DCCs under the old rate, and allow for the project to go forward, which represents about 30 units of lower cost housing into our community, and all the other benefits associated with the rezoning, including the improved safety along Highway 101, the improved bus stop, and the getting the tenure over part of the Chapman Creek riparian corridor, which has been identified as a benefit in the OCP. So what besides asking for authorization for entering into this development agreement to secure all the conditions of adoption, would you also be looking at getting authorization to enter into a covenant with Ministry of Transportation and Chapman Creek Holdings and JMP Holdings to meet some of the conditions the Ministry of Transportation has related to the servicing of the property, namely that left-hand turn bay that we have been discussing. So we would be a partner in that since we are the issuers of building permits, but the main requirements are based off what MOTI needs, and they've already had the agreement. It's been signed off by MOTI, but it would need our signature as well. And then the fourth part of the fourth recommendation is that we schedule a special council meeting at 4 p.m. on January 31st, 2018, so we can look at adopting the rezoning bylaw and the OCP amendment bylaw for Chapman Creek Holdings. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Mueller.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to ask if there are any other similar applications that are trying to get in under the deadline that you're currently working with.
There are. We have a few subdivision applications. I believe we have 3 who are trying to get their final survey plans to us, but those don't require council approval. Those go to the approving officer. This is the only application that's in this very close stage that would require council approval to move forward. So we are working on 3 other applications, though.
Okay, and just a follow-up to that, my support of this project really was hinging on the approved acceptable sewage treatment system, and to see that, to make sure it passes the smell test, as you may say. We're not going to get a chance if we do it this way to see that in advance. So in your dealings with them so far, does there sound like there's any technical issues to overcome that are surmountable there?
I have been speaking with Vancouver Coastal Health. They have received a filing that is acceptable to them for the system. So they did receive that. It just hasn't been, of course, finalized at this point. So, but Vancouver Coastal Health has the filing at
So
this
it's
point.
meeting current requirements. We won't really know how effective it is until it's actually being used over some time. But
And just as it reiterate, the proposed system also replaces the old system that has been servicing the park for many years too. So it should be a net benefit for the existing residents as well.
And I have a question. I'm not sure who best to answer it. Perhaps you, Mr. Thompson, or perhaps others. What level of advanced stage would a project have to be at before you'd decide to entertain what's a rather clever workaround in terms of timing and scheduling?
Well,
I mean, this is both very positive and it's a workaround.
Yes.
And it also depletes the DCC reserves.
Yes, we do understand that, and that is a implication of this as well. So for many of the projects, we could consider a development agreement to secure the conditions of adoption at any given point. Of course, the more advanced the project is, the more certainty council have when making those conditions. They can see the progress that's been made before, of course, council makes their final decision. It really comes down to how comfortable council is with the project, if they've fine with the progress, if they want to see more work, but a covenant is, of course, binding on the land. So it does restrict them moving forward without, they couldn't be able to move forward, have the units be occupied and sold and everything until, of course, they complete all these conditions. So it's really a matter of comfort of council.
Thank you for that. And I ask in part because the CEO and your new director and I met with a developer just 2 days ago, who asked a very similar question about the impending DCCs on February 1st. I'm not anywhere close to this stage, but the mayor gave him the very clear answer that you don't get around them. They're going to increase the cost. This is a project for which we understand will be what's now called affordable in the district of Sechelt, and expensive as it will be, and as a project we've supported all along. So I'm pleased that staff were able to find a way to work with people to make it continue. Councillor Lutz.
Thank you. I too support this project, especially being more affordable than a lot of other projects. I don't know what price range we're looking at for the units that are going in, but just this DCC alone would increase those by about $15,000 a unit. So it might make a big difference. I am still disappointed that it has to be 55 and over, because there's an awful lot of other needs at a younger age, but I will support this at this stage. Thanks.
Any further discussion? Councillor Wright?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd like to move recommendation 2.
Thank you. How about 3 as well? And 4, if 4 o'clock is the best time of that day, we're going to be working till 3:30. 4 o'clock? Okay. I want that day to be, this won't be very long meeting, will it? Okay. I have ferries to catch that afternoon, so I'm just trying to make sure I can do that. So is that a moving recommendations 2, 3, and 4?
I'll do recommendation 2, 3, and 4.
Thank you, and that's seconded by Councillor Shanks. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Oh, sorry, I didn't count the vote and I haven't seen it. So further discussion, Councillor Mueller.
I was actually just going to ask that 4 be separated out, but we've got all 4 on the table. Sorry, all 3. I'm not sure how that works procedurally, but
We can go back to 2 and 3. Just take it out. So the motion we're looking at is recommendation 2 and 3. It's agreeable. Yeah, it's not a problem. Because he started with 2. He was happy. He wanted 3 out too. Councillor.
Let's make a deal.
Councillor Wright.
Well, Your Worship, I was coerced into 3 and 4. Okay.
Let's go back. And in process, and it was my fault for trying to move this forward and to disrupt the orderly process of the meeting. We have a recommendation number 2 that is moved by Councillor Wright and seconded by Councillor Shanks. All those in further discussion on recommendation 2? All those in favor? That's carried. Recommendation 3, which is regarding a covenant between the Minister of Transportation and the role of the corporate officer, is moved by Councillor Seegers and seconded by Councillor Lutz. Discussion of that item. All those in favor of that item? That's carried. And item 4, that a special meeting of council be scheduled for 4 p.m. on January 31st, 2018, and that's a Wednesday. And is that moved before? Let's get it on the table, and then we can amend it if we need to. Thank you. Councillor Shanks is moving it, and Councillor Lutz second. Discussion of January 31st, 4 p.m. Councillor Mueller.
Yeah, the reason why I wanted this kind of pulled out is so we could have a bit of a discussion around that. I know that council has supported this the whole way along, but we have yet procedurally to have a special meeting of council specifically for a development. And so that's something that I'm not entirely comfortable with. I understand why it's here. We did this in the past to deal with certain types of applications to government. We've done this to deal with, we did just before Christmas to deal with the homeless. That was a community health emergency. I think we've all recognized that. I think this is unprecedented to go for a special meeting of council to deal with one development. And so I will not be supporting this.
Okay. And the reason that others may consider supporting it is we only have one council meeting scheduled for January, and that's the one we're in today. And normally we would have 2 in a month, and that didn't occur. So is there any other discussion? If not, I'll look for all those in favor and those opposed. One opposed, but that's carried. And thank you, staff, for working cooperatively with the proponents and this project. And let it be noted, that was a business-friendly gesture. That's our new tagline for 2018. Moving on, item 11, reports from councillors. Item 11.1, Councillors' Report, and I would like to start on my, well, actually, again, because we do the SCRD reports, if I think it's appropriate to do the council reports. No, let's start it with Councillor Wright. If you don't mind, we'll work this way and we'll have Councillor Inkster do double duty. Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Your Worship. It's been a light couple of weeks, okay, in terms of meetings. No poem for you tonight. I attended the Advisory Planning Commission meeting. It was a pretty short meeting. There was only 2 items on it, and we're in and out in about 35 minutes. Also attended the SCRD Planning Committee meeting. And of course, today we were in Finance Committee for a part of the day. Contacted the East Porpoise Bay Community Association because I'm their liaison rep, and I let them know that so that I was available. And finally, had a meeting with about 10 to 12 different people at different times, believe it or not. And the issues ranged everywhere from the homeless shelter to water to the landfill. So water is still front and center for a lot of residents on the Sunshine Coast, and we need to be very much aware of that. And that concludes my report.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Seegers.
Thank you. Very short. The Seniors Planning Table is having quarterly meetings now, and members of the planning table, given that they don't have any funding, are taking on hosting the meetings. District of Sechelt will be hosting the next one, so I had a meeting regarding that in preparation for it, and we will have some of our staff presenting at that meeting to the 40-plus organizations in the community. That's my report.
And we'll have that at Seaside or right in this room. And Councillor Mueller.
Yeah, likewise, I have a very short report. Enjoyed a great holidays with my family up in the Kootenays. Got snowed in. In terms of council work, I left my iPad at home. So, but I was thinking about the budget and just reflecting on the year. Came back very refreshed. Looking forward to this year.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Lutz.
Thank you. I too enjoyed the break and time with family. Attended a very interesting meeting the first week in January with a joint committee that's been formed. I'm not sure which ministry, but I think health, that are traveling around the province discussing rural health issues, the needs, and the kinds of things we feel need to be changed in our communities. They're doing 243 rural communities, and it was interesting discussion, and out of that discussion will come a report back to us for comments, and then I believe it will be published to the public. And what actions will come out of it, we'll have to wait and see. I then attended a meeting with the mayor on last Saturday with myself, Nicholas Simons, and Mabel Elmore, who is the parliamentary secretary. And the meeting was on behalf of Shane Simpson, and that was to discuss priorities, poverty, and work required to develop a poverty reduction strategy. And there will be more coming forward to the community to be able to tell their issues and common type problems that are happening in the community for people in or near poverty. And hopefully out of that in the fall will come an actual poverty reduction strategy. We're one of the, if not the only province that doesn't have a strategy to work from. I've observed 2 meetings at the SCRD, their planning, and also a board meeting, and attended a Sunshine Coast Labour Council meeting to have some discussions around the planned Day of Mourning ceremony in April. And then today, our Finance Committee meeting. So that's my report.
Thank you very much for that report. And Councillor Shanks.
Yes, thank you very much, Your Worship. So I don't want too many members of council to read anything into what I'm going to say, but I have the challenges of meeting family commitments in what sometime in the future could be a blended family. So I have many family members live up the valley, and so does my other half at this point in time. So just getting to meet all of them and coordinate things was an interesting process. And had a very good Christmas. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that report. Future holidays will be more complicated. Councillor Inkster. Sorry, I had it on and I clicked it off accidentally.
The year is still young, so it's going to be a busy year at both this table and at the regional district. I just wanted to start by thanking staff for very quickly reacting to an issue with some of the sports fields, the soccer nets. They fixed them. Anybody that's used them knows that there was problems. And the reason I think it was a fast fix and it was good that they did that, and I want to thank them for it, is that other people would have tried fixing them, which would have brought up issues with quality and some liability. So staff actually, upon being noted that there was problems with the nets, fixed them in about an hour or two, fixed all the nets that were falling apart. So I just want to thank them for doing that, and it's very much appreciated by hundreds of kids and coaches and an organization. And that's that report. And you want me to move right into regional district?
No, we'll segue to me first, and then we'll let you do that. So I'd just like to say that it was also a good break, and like Councillor Mueller, a time for reflection on the past and looking forward to the future. And the break for me lasted, I think, from December 23rd till January 5th. It was pretty good, and by January 5th, it was back pretty much full throttle in terms of emails and work and the regular meetings that mayors and CAOs and others seem to have in answering that. And of course, one of the things that occurred recently was the community forest moving on to EW28 and the response to that. You've seen some emails around that. We're trying to monitor that as it moves forward, but there's always a number of issues that we're dealing with as we go forward. But the time in between the 23rd and January 5th was quite welcome and a good opportunity to think about where we were at. Councillor Lutz mentioned, the Deputy Mayor Lutz mentioned the meeting with the provincial secretary on poverty reduction strategy. It's quite clear that this year poverty, affordability, and those issues about inequality in our society are going to be front and center for all of us. How municipalities respond, I don't know, but we will find out in part when we go forward to our community with the sessions on the emergency shelter and further work with BC Housing, which we've committed to do in the spring. So I'm looking forward to that, to actually be connecting with the community a little bit more. And concluding that, I'll move to item 11.2, which is the SCRD board, and we'll start with Director Inkster's report.
So last week was the first set of meetings since the Christmas break that's been referenced by a number of council members. There was an infrastructure meeting and, a planning meeting. Infrastructure is tomorrow, and I'll speak to that in a sec. And then there was a board meeting in the afternoon, a quick hospital district meeting. The items on the planning meeting, as many of council members know, generally deals with rural functions and doesn't have a lot of voting from CSHELT. As we know from tonight, we have our own planning department and quite an active, busy development municipality. So there's where we should be focused in those areas. Tomorrow, we will have the infrastructure meeting. As I mentioned, there, as far as I can tell from the items presented, there's not a lot on water, but there was some discussion on water at the pre-meeting that, as vice chair, I sit in on, and it was quite a healthy discussion, I'll call it, on the issue of water and where we need to proceed, and that then triggered a discussion with myself and the chair mayor on the issue and what we need to probably, as double representatives, be speaking to at that table within the next number of weeks for clarity and how we properly move forward on that issue. As well, tomorrow we'll be dealing with the organics discussion, which is tied to the landfill discussion, which I've mentioned to council, that has a lifespan closing in the next few years. But if we look at some other proposals and or ideas in planning in the waste reduction area, including organics, we may be able to lengthen out the landfill life, which would mean that we wouldn't have to necessarily, although we will have to soon look for alternatives that may, and I hope doesn't include shipping our garbage offshore, but we need to look at ways to dispose of it. I've warned about this. We need to put a plan in place. It's going to be, I think it was 10 to 12 years, I think it is. And if I recall, I was at the regional district the first time 10 years ago. So that will give this council an idea of how quickly that time will pass. So we need to be working on that issue. In terms of the organics issue and moving in that direction, the good thing for the District of Sechelt is next week at the Public Works meeting, we will be looking at our recycling program. A report will come to the committee in the next couple of days that will look at our recycling program and the contributions that will most likely come from Recycle BC. And with that money, as I have indicated and lobbied for before, we should and hopefully be able to cover the costs mostly of implementing an organics program in Sechelt. So this would dovetail quite nicely into what the regional district's doing and would allow us to put 1 to 2 bins if we approve the program. That still has to be done in front of our homes in order to collect what we've continued to do, which we've noticed at Christmas that the blue bins is a large amount of paper and cardboard products. Everyone most likely saw the bins overflowing with the 1 week hiatus. And then we'll add the organics piece if I say that's approved, because the identified issue now at the regional district that we've talked about is food waste. That's the big weight problem going into the landfill, and if we reduce that, it reduces a lot of the garbage going into landfill. So it looks like one of those synergistic situations with a number of decisions that have to be made at both levels that may lengthen out the landfill and may move us in a more sustainable direction in terms of waste reduction. Next week, we will be talking about budget. That's Monday and Tuesday, and I'm sure a number of council members will be there, and they're both long days to talk about budget at the regional district. As everyone knows now, it's the first round, and then the second round will come probably the next month as staff prepares the decisions from the first round. So I look forward to that, but that means a few long days next week to deal with the business of government. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And 10 years from when recycling was first at the table is either time goes quickly or some organizations move very slowly. Some issues. And
talk about depots.
We want to keep that in mind so we can move things forward that need to be moved forward. The reason that water is coming up for discussion is the letter that this council asked to be sent to the SCRD is on the agenda for the Infrastructure Committee meeting tomorrow. So you may recall in December, we sent a letter identifying supply and storage as being a priority for our community, and they'll be receiving that for the first time at committee stage tomorrow. So that'll be an opportunity to see if they agree with that priority and what discussion may come out of that. The only thing I'd like to mention from the regional district was we did have the Sunshine Coast Regional District Hospital Board meeting, which was the first of the year and the time for the election of the chair and the vice chair. And Frank Morrow from Pender Harbor, Area A, was elected chair to continue in that role, and Gary Knorr was elected to continue in the role of vice chair. So they'll be continuing to lead the hospital district work. Speaking of which, we'll soon get a press release talking about the final completion and opening of the expansion for the hospital, and the contribution of the regional hospital district, i.e. the taxpayers of the Sunshine Coast, was $15 odd million out of a $40 million project. So we do have an important role to play on hospital work, and that'll be coming out fairly soon because we're right near to the completion and a grand opening for that expansion project. I think that's all from the regional district at the moment. Moving on to item 12, which is items for information or release. We'll start with council correspondence, and there's a number of these we have to actually look at and deal with. First, a motion to receive the correspondence. Thank you, Councillor Seegers and Councillor Mueller. Items 1 through 11. All those in favor? Thank you. And for discussion, 8, 9, we should just mention that we received $15,000 from the provincial and UBCM stream for an age-friendly grant on age-friendly trails, which is for active members and making sure that all ages can use our trails and parks. We get a thanks from Rain City. Change in the library hours, which was also discussed in committee today. The library hours will be reduced by 3 going forward in order to allow library staff to deal and manage with the work there, and that's an operational decision. They're operating above the contract requirements now, so reducing it by 3 is simply a choice of their own. And item 8, which comes back from the SCRD, which is on the proposed naming of John Fair Lake. You'll recall that this was discussed at this council and then sent to the regional district and with a letter. And you'll notice from their recommendation that they want us to confirm that the District of Sechelt confirm our intention to make a formal application for naming of a geographic feature. And I don't know if we'd actually made that intention, but if we're going to, now's the time to do that. And they also want us to note that the policy of the branch, of the Office Heritage branch of the Ministry of Forests, etc., specifically excludes usually the use of personal names from geographical features. So if we do want to support this, we'll have to ask for an exemption from that particular policy. Councillor Inkster.
Just introducing what you asked us to do in forms of a motion. If, however, that needs to be worded, this is
a motion to support to actually make a formal submission.
Yeah.
Okay. And seconded by Councillor Lutz. We've discussed it at various times. Any further discussion? The only part I would want to be very sure before it comes back or goes forward is that the family, the immediate family of John Fair has been contacted and is aware of this and that it has their support. I think they've been talked to informally, but I don't know if there's been any actual formal, say this is the stage we're at, this is what we're about to do. Councillor Inkster?
Yeah, I think if you want me to speak to it before Councillor Mulder does. Yeah. We've received an email at the regional district from via Chair Noor at the time, I believe, in support of this from the widow who does not live here, and I believe I'd spoken to that at that table. And I also received, because of the media discussion, thank goodness that there was some discussion about it that went in the, I think, Coast Reporter. Somebody, I don't know how they did it, but they tracked me down. The brother of Mr. Fair, I think Lonnie, he knows me, so he somehow found me, caught me going to some place. It's really weird. But anyway, he said to me that he was in heavy duty support, and I asked him to make sure that his siblings were in support. I mean, this is a lengthy process that we, in a sense, are going through. I guess we're covering all the bases, but there is very strong support from the family members and children that I've spoken to move forward in this direction. And on the other hand, I haven't heard from anybody that has said this is not a good idea. And I also asked the corporate officer to make sure, verify again, in case this came up because this individual, Lonnie, doesn't work with email. So it'd be a verbal confirmation, and I provided the phone number. So
good
to our corporate office.
And if there's an email in the SCRD files, that would preclude the need for a second phone call or a second contact if that's already been done. Thanks for that information. And it should be in their files somewhere. I'm not sure yet, though, how correspondence to the chair gets into their system. Councillor Mueller.
I just wanted to provide a couple extra comments to what Councillor Inkster had said. I've asked a number of times, a number of places, because you have to be of course, very sensitive to this type of a situation, and I haven't heard anything but more or less, why haven't you done it already? That's we've done the time, we've sent this forward and back, and I think now's the time to just go ahead and do it. John Fair was a fantastic community member, we all know that, and the way that this came about is an absolute tragedy, but we'll remember this, and the community will remember this in all the years ahead.
Okay. And when we do write the submission, we'll maybe have a couple of different eyes look at the call for the exemption, because there's a number of ways we might be able to strengthen that. Just any further discussion? Motion on the floor to move forward on this. All those in favor? Thank you, that's carried. Is there any other correspondence that we need to pull out or discuss in more detail? There's a request to look at our nonprofit rates for Seaside. We do have nonprofit rates, but we have fairly strict rules on the sound system. That might have been more important 10 years ago when the sound system was new and complicated. It might be less important now, but it's something that we should keep in mind. Councillor Inkster.
Yeah, I'm glad you pointed out that one. That was one I earlier was attempting to pull out the letter regarding the sound system. It is true that when originally put in, there was some confusion, some concern that it wouldn't be looked after, but the groups involved had gone to quite the length to provide instructions so that the sound system is operated properly so that there's no damage to occur. So I think it's something we should look at it, because I know we charge a not-for-profit rate for the use of the building, but should we have a large rate? Is it properly proportional to have a much larger rate proportionally for the use of the equipment? Is something we should consider.
So let's take that as a motion to staff to review the policy on the sound system at Seaside.
Yes.
Seconded, Councillor Seegers. Thank you. Any further discussion of that? Councillor Mueller.
I just think it's a timely recommendation. I know, having used that facility in times in the past, that becomes an issue, and we want the facility to be used to its fullest and remove any hindrances that can logically be removed.
Thank you. Having used that facility and the sound system, it's not much to protect. It's not a very good sound system. All those in favor? Any opposed? Any other correspondence that needs to be discussed? Moving on then, we have the stats, as they're called. Sunshine Coast RCMP Detachment Report. Let's call it a report. Sunshine Coast RCMP Report for monthly crimes. And we have the Sechelt Visitor Information Report on visitors. Can I have a motion to receive both of those? Councillor Seegers, Councillor Mueller seconding. All those in favor? And any discussion? First of the RCMP. And secondly, of the visitor information. Councillor Seegers.
I'd like to have the visitor information staff indicate why the large discrepancy between 2016 and 2017 for a number of visitors. It's dropped quite substantially. So I'd just like them to address that and bring us back some more
If
information.
they know, yeah,
Yeah,
if
thanks.
they have any understanding. We've never had the visitor information, I mean, we'd have this contract. I don't think they come and visit a committee like once or twice in the year. So it might be useful for staff to coordinate an opportunity for the visitor information people who have this 5-year contract to come and talk to us on occasion, as requested by Councillor Seegers. Probably at the Finance Committee, because we're all there. And that's the committee that awards the contract. Looking for a motion to adjourn. Councillor Wright, Councillor Mueller, all those in favor? That's carried. 8:30. I was debating whether this was a 2-hour meeting or an hour and a half meeting. We just made the hour and a half. Pam, welcome back. Yes.